3 weeks after my husband died, I learned something that changed the way I looked at my own son forever. It happened on a Thursday evening, just after sunset. The house was quiet in that strange way only a grieving house can be quiet. Too still, too careful, as if even the walls understood that someone important was missing. I was standing in the kitchen, rinsing a teacup I hadn't really used, only held for comfort, when I heard voices drift in from the hallway. My son Ethan had let himself in with his spare key an hour earlier. He said he wanted to check on me, and I had been grateful at first. Grief makes you thankful for even the smallest kindness. His wife, Vanessa, came with him, wearing a soft beige coat and a perfume so sharp and floral it seemed to cut through the stale air of morning. I had told them I wasn't hungry, but they insisted on bringing takeout anyway. They spread cartons of food across the dining table my husband and I had bought 38 years ago, back when we still counted every dollar and thought a matching set of chairs meant we were finally becoming respectable adults. Ethan spoke gently. Vanessa smiled often. If anyone had seen us from outside the front window, they would have thought I was being well cared for. But kindness performed for appearances has a thin sound to it. You can hear the emptiness underneath if you've lived long enough. I was carrying the teacup back to the cupboard when I heard Vanessa say, in a low voice she probably thought I couldn't catch, "We can't keep waiting forever." I froze. There are moments in life when something inside you goes perfectly still before your mind even understands why. That was one of them. Ethan answered her, quieter than she was. "Not so loud. She's in the kitchen," Vanessa said. "And anyway, this is practical. Your mother can't stay here alone in a house this size. It doesn't make sense." I don't know what hurt more, that she was talking about me like a problem that needed managing, or that there was no surprise in Ethan's voice, no outrage, no immediate defense. Only caution, only fear of being overheard. I stood there without moving, one hand on the cabinet handle, and listened. "My mother is fine," Ethan said, but he sounded tired, not firm. The kind of tired people use when they are halfway convinced already. Vanessa gave a little laugh. "Fine? Ethan, she's 69, newly widowed, and sitting on a property big enough for a family. We talked about this. That word slid under my skin. My husband had been dead 23 days. 23. I still woke up every morning reaching for Thomas's side of the bed before remembering, in the same brutal instant, that the dent in the mattress was no longer a promise of his return. His slippers were still by the bedroom door. His reading glasses still rested on the table beside his chair in the living room. I had not moved them. Grief had made a museum of my home, and I was not ready for anyone to come in and rearrange the exhibits. "This isn't the time," Ethan murmured. "Then when is the time?" Vanessa snapped, her voice sharpening. "Because my mother needs somewhere to stay by summer, and this house is wasted on one person. The house. Not your mother's house. Not the home your father built with his own hands. Not the place where you learned to walk, where your height was marked on the pantry wall every birthday until you turned 16 and became too cool for sentiment. Just this house." I pressed my lips together so tightly they hurt. Thomas and I had built our lives brick by brick, bill by bill, sacrifice by sacrifice. He had worked overtime for years at the machine plant. I had taken bookkeeping jobs from home and sold my paintings at church fairs when money was thin. We skipped vacations. We drove used cars. We said no to luxuries so that one day there would be something solid beneath our feet, something that belonged to us, and someday, perhaps, would shelter the people we loved. When Ethan married Vanessa, I had been happy for him, truly happy. She was polished, confident, and ambitious, everything my quiet son seemed to admire. I told myself her coolness was simply reserve. Not every family grows warm overnight. I gave them time, then money, then more money. First it was the wedding, when just a few unexpected costs turned into $12,000 from the savings Thomas and I had promised not to touch. Then it was the down payment for their house. Then help with furniture. Then help with repairs. Then, when interest rates rose and Ethan admitted they were struggling, I quietly agreed to cover part of their mortgage each month until they got ahead. That had been 2 years ago. They never quite got ahead. Now, standing in my own kitchen, listening to my daughter-in-law discuss where to place me as if I were old furniture that no longer matched the room, I felt something inside me shift. Not break. Breaking is loud, dramatic, obvious. This was different. This was a clean, silent crack running through the foundation of everything I had believed. Ethan spoke again, and this time his voice was so low I nearly missed it. If she agrees, then maybe assisted living would be easier. Assisted living. The words seemed to drain the air from the room. I had to grip the counter to steady myself. I was not ill. I was not confused. I still drove my own car, paid my own bills, tended my own garden, and climbed the narrow basement stairs with baskets of laundry balanced on one hip. Only that morning, I'd spent an hour kneeling beside the rose bushes Thomas planted for our 10th anniversary, trimming dead blooms because it felt like the only useful thing I could do with my hands. And yet my son, the child I'd carried, fed, nursed through fevers, defended in schoolyard fights, and stood beside through every heartbreak of his young life, was speaking about sending me away. For convenience. For space. For plans that apparently mattered more than I did. I heard chair scrape. Footsteps approached the kitchen. I moved quickly then, setting the cup into the sink and turning on the faucet, so it would sound as though I had heard nothing at all. By the time Ethan appeared in the doorway, I was staring down at running water with what I hoped looked like ordinary sorrow instead of humiliation. "Mom," he said gently. I turned and managed a faint smile. "Yes." He studied my face for a second, maybe checking for evidence, maybe only checking whether I was still manageable. "Do you want me to take out the trash before we go?" Such a small question, such an ordinary kindness. And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. Betrayal rarely arrives with thunder. Sometimes it comes dressed as concern, with soft hands and a careful voice. I looked at my son, my only child, and saw, perhaps for the first time in my life, not the little boy he had once been, but the man he had become. And I realized that grief had not left me entirely empty. It had left me clear. That night, after they left, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat alone in the living room, in the same chair where Thomas used to read the newspaper every evening, and let the darkness settle around me. The house felt different now, not just empty, but exposed, as if something private had been uncovered and could never be hidden again. The takeout containers were still on the table. Half-eaten, forgotten. Vanessa had laughed at something on her phone before they left, a bright, careless sound that echoed in my ears long after the front door closed. I hadn't cleaned anything up. For years, I had been the one who quietly restored order after every gathering, washing dishes, wiping counters, folding napkins, smoothing over awkward silences no one else acknowledged. It was a habit so deeply ingrained I barely noticed it anymore. But that night I noticed, and I chose not to move. Instead, I sat there and replayed every word I had overheard. Asterisk, we can't keep waiting forever. Asterisk, asterisk, this house is wasted on one person. Asterisk, asterisk, assisted living would be easier. Asterisk, easier for whom? I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. For the first time since Thomas died, I allowed myself to think clearly, not as a grieving wife, not as a mother trying to hold on to what remained of her family, but as a woman who had been quietly cornered in her own life. And when I looked at things that way, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The financial help that was supposed to be temporary, the subtle pressure to simplify my life, the way Vanessa always asked questions about the house, the accounts, the paperwork, never directly, always wrapped in politeness. Even Ethan's visits. Had he come because he cared? Or because he was checking how much longer I would stay inconveniently independent? A slow, steady feeling spread through my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something sharper. Clarity. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. Every object held a memory. The framed photograph on the mantel from our 25th anniversary. The worn edge of the coffee table, where Ethan had once carved his initials as a teenager and tried to sand them away before I noticed. The curtains I had sewn myself one summer when money was tight. This was not a property. This was my life. And suddenly, with a quiet certainty that surprised even me, I understood something else. If I allowed them to decide what happened next, I would lose more than just my home. I would lose myself. I stood up slowly. My knees ached a little, the kind of ache that comes with age, not weakness. And I walked to the dining table. I looked down at the mess they had left behind, then reached out and closed one of the takeout boxes. Not to clean, just to mark the end of something. Because in that moment, I made a decision. I would not confront them. Not yet. I would not argue, plead, or explain. I would simply stop. Stop paying. Stop supporting. Stop making their lives easier at the cost of my own dignity. They thought I was fragile. They thought I needed them. They were wrong, and they were about to find out. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For a moment, everything felt the same. The quiet house. The soft light slipping through the curtains. The familiar ache in my chest where grief still lived. And then I remembered, not Thomas's absence. I had been remembering that every morning for weeks. No, I remembered the conversation, the plan, the way my life had been reduced to a logistical problem over takeout containers and polite voices. I sat up slowly on the edge of the bed, my hands resting on my lap. The room was still dim, but I didn't turn on a lamp. I didn't need more light. Clarity doesn't come from brightness. It comes from truth. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. For years, the first thing I did every morning was check messages. Ethan, sometimes, the bank, reminders, small pieces of a life that had quietly revolved around making sure everything and everyone was taken care of. Today, I didn't open any of that. Instead, I opened my banking app. My thumb hovered over the screen for just a second, not because I was unsure, but because I understood exactly what this moment meant. For 2 years, I had been transferring money into Ethan's account at the beginning of every month. Quietly, reliably, without conditions, without reminders. He never had to ask twice. I told myself it was temporary. That was what mothers do. That helping him stay afloat meant helping his marriage, his future, his stability. I told myself many things. But this morning, I told myself the truth. It was not help anymore. It was dependency. And worse, it was expectation. I opened the transfer history. There it was. Line after line. Month after month. My support had become invisible to them. Normal. Assumed. I exhaled slowly and pressed cancel scheduled transfer. The screen flickered for a moment. Then the recurring payment disappeared. Just like that. No dramatic sound. No confirmation beyond a quiet notification. Transfer canceled. I stared at the screen a little longer than necessary. I expected to feel guilt, or fear, or even hesitation. But none of those came. What I felt instead was space. As if something that had been quietly pressing against my chest for years had finally lifted. I set the phone down. Then I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the garden was still covered in early morning mist. The rose bushes Thomas planted were waiting for sunlight, their shapes soft and blurred in the gray light. For the first time since his death, I didn't feel like I was standing in the ruins of something. I felt like I was standing at the beginning of something. Something uncertain, something uncomfortable, but something honest. Later that morning, my phone rang. Ethan. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice casual, too casual. "Quick question. Did the transfer go through this morning? I don't see it on my end." Of course he didn't. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I understood what came next would matter. "No," I said calmly. A pause. A small one. But I heard it. "What do you mean, no?" he asked, a slight edge creeping into his voice. "I mean," I replied, just as calmly, "there won't be a transfer this month." Silence. Not confusion. Not misunderstanding. Just silence. And then, slowly, "Mom, we talked about this." Yes, we had. Just not in the way he thought. Ethan didn't hang up, but he didn't speak either. The silence stretched just long enough to make it clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was resistance. "Mom," he said finally, slower this time, as if choosing his words more carefully. "You know we rely on that." There it was. Not appreciate. Not thank you. Not even need help right now. Rely. I leaned lightly against the kitchen counter, my fingers resting on the cool marble surface. "Yes," I said. "I am aware." Another pause. This one's sharper. What's going on? He asked. Did something happen? Are you having financial issues? Or, no, interrupta gently. Nothing like that. Then why would you just stop? His voice tightened, the calm slipping. You can't just change things without telling us. I almost smiled. For years, I had changed my life around their needs without telling anyone. Quietly adjusting, quietly giving, quietly absorbing the consequences. And now, suddenly, I was the one being unreasonable. I just did tell you, I said, still calm. There won't be any more transfers. That landed harder. I could hear it in his breathing. Mom, this isn't fair. Fair. The word echoed in my mind. I turned slightly and looked out the window again. The morning light had grown stronger now, cutting through the mist, illuminating the garden with quiet clarity. For a long time, I had defined fairness as sacrifice, as giving more than I received, as making sure everyone else was comfortable, even when it cost me something. But fairness, I was beginning to understand, had nothing to do with being useful. Ethan, I said, do you remember what you said to me when you asked for help the first time? He hesitated. What do you mean? You told me it was temporary, I continued, that you just needed a little time to get ahead. We are getting ahead, he said quickly. Things are just tight right now. They've been tight for 2 years, I said, not raising my voice. Silence again. Then, more defensive now. You know how the market's been. And the house. Yes, I said. The house. That word hung between us. I didn't explain. I didn't mention what I had overheard the night before. Not yet. But something in my tone must have shifted because Ethan's voice changed too. Less confident, more cautious. What about the house? He asked. I let the question sit for a moment. Then I said quietly, I think it's time you and Vanessa start managing things on your own. That's not realistic, he snapped. We structured everything around my support. I finished for him. He didn't deny it. Mom, he said, exasperated now. This affects more than just us. Vanessa and I have responsibilities. Plans. Plans. I closed my eyes briefly. I knew exactly what plans he meant. And for the first time, instead of feeling hurt, I felt something steadier, stronger. Then you should take care of those plans, I said. My voice didn't shake, not even a little. There was a long pause. When Ethan spoke again, his tone had changed completely. Colder. You're really going to do this? He asked. I opened my eyes and looked straight ahead, though he couldn't see me. Yes, I said. Another pause. Then, did Vanessa say something to you? The question was sharp, careful. I almost admired it, but I didn't answer directly. Instead, I said, this isn't about Vanessa. Which was true. It was about something much deeper. Something I should have seen a long time ago. Ethan exhaled slowly, like someone trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping through his fingers. Okay, he said finally. Fine. If that's how you want to handle it, we'll talk about this later. Not thank you. Not I understand. Just we'll talk later. As if this was still a negotiation. As if I hadn't already decided. Take care, Ethan, I said softly. And before he could respond, I ended the call. The quiet that followed felt different from the silence the night before. Not heavy. Not empty. Clear. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next demand. I wasn't anticipating the next problem I would be expected to solve. I was simply still, and somewhere in that stillness, a new realization began to form. Taking back my money was only the beginning. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I left the house without telling anyone where I was going. No calls, no updates, no quiet habit of making sure Ethan could reach me if he needed something. I simply picked up my keys, put on my coat, and stepped outside. The air was cool, carrying that faint early spring sharpness that wakes you up whether you want it to or not. For a moment, I stood on the front porch, looking out at the street I had lived on for nearly 4 decades. So much of my life had happened here. And yet, I suddenly felt like a visitor. I drove without a destination at first. Past the grocery store where I used to shop every Tuesday morning. Past the small diner where Thomas and I celebrated our anniversaries when money was tight. Past the bank. I slowed down as I passed it. Then, almost without thinking, I pulled into the parking lot. Inside, everything smelled the same as always. Polished floors, paper, and the faint scent of coffee from the machine near the waiting area. The young teller smiled at me politely, the way people do when they recognize you but don't really know your story. "Good afternoon," she said. "How can I help you today?" I returned the smile. "I'd like to review my accounts," I said. Simple words, but they carried weight. Within minutes, I was sitting in a small office with a financial advisor, a man in his 40s with careful eyes and a practiced, professional calm. He pulled up my information, scrolling quietly. "You have everything very well organized," he said after a moment. "Is there something specific you're looking to change?" "Yes, everything. I'd like to make some adjustments," I said. He nodded. "Of course." I took a breath, not deep, not dramatic, just enough to steady my thoughts. "I want to remove all automatic transfers," I continued. "And I want to make sure that no one has access to my accounts except me." He looked up briefly, not surprised, just attentive. "Is there currently someone with access?" he asked. "No," I said. Then, after a small pause, "But there won't be. Not now. Not later." He nodded again, understanding more than I had actually said. We went through everything. Accounts, permissions, notifications. Each step felt small on its own, but together, they felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I had slowly given away. At the end of the meeting, he turned the screen slightly toward me. "Everything is now fully under your sole control," he said. "If you ever want to set up support or shared access again, we can do that anytime." I looked at the screen, then I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I think this is exactly how it should be." When I left the bank, the sunlight felt warmer. Not because the weather had changed, but because something inside me had. For years, I had believed that love meant giving without limits. That being a good mother meant always being available, always being supportive, always saying yes, even when no might have protected me. But now, walking back to my car, I understood something I should have learned long ago. Love without boundaries becomes permission, and I was done giving that permission. As I started the engine, my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Asterisk, we need to talk. Tonight, asterisk." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. For once, the conversation would happen on my terms. I was already home when they arrived. I hadn't answered Ethan's message. I hadn't called back. I hadn't prepared what I was going to say. For years, I would have. I would have rehearsed every sentence in my head, softened every edge, made sure my words wouldn't upset him, wouldn't create tension, wouldn't disturb the fragile balance I had spent so long maintaining. But that evening, I didn't. I simply waited. At exactly 6:12 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of a car pulling into the driveway. A moment later, the front door opened without a knock. Of course, they still treated this house as if it were theirs. Ethan walked in first, his expression tight, controlled. Vanessa followed a step behind him, her posture perfectly composed, her eyes already scanning the room like she was assessing something. Not visiting, assessing. "Mom," Ethan said, not bothering with a smile this time. "We need to talk." "I know," I replied calmly. "You said." I remained seated in the living room, in Thomas's chair. For a brief second, Ethan seemed thrown off by that, by the fact that I hadn't stood up to greet him, hadn't moved toward him, hadn't performed the usual gestures of warmth. Vanessa noticed it too. I could tell by the way her gaze sharpened slightly. They sat down across from me. Not beside me. Across. Like a meeting. Like a negotiation. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What's going on?" he asked. "This isn't like you." "No, it wasn't." "That's exactly the point," I said. Vanessa crossed her legs slowly, her voice smooth when she spoke. "If this is about stress or grief," she said, "we understand. But making sudden financial decisions like this affects more than just you." There was again, carefully worded, reasonable on the surface, controlling underneath. I looked at her, not with anger, not with accusation, just clearly. "For years," I said, "my decisions have affected all of you. And I never heard any concern about that." She didn't respond. Ethan did. "That's not fair," he said quickly. "You offered to help us." "Yes," I said. "I did. And now you're just taking it away?" "I'm not taking anything away," I replied. I'm simply no longer giving. That stopped him. It was a small difference in words, but a very large difference in truth. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. So what changed? She asked. Her tone was calm, but her eyes were not. I held her gaze. Then quietly I said, I heard you. The room went still. Not confused, not uncertain. Still. Ethan frowned. Heard what? I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on her. The conversation, I said. The one about the house. About me. Vanessa didn't react immediately. She was good. Very good. But there are moments when even the most composed people can't completely hide themselves. And I saw it. Just for a second. Calculation shifting into awareness. Ethan turned toward her. What is she talking about? Vanessa exhaled softly, then looked back at me. I think you misunderstood, she said smoothly. We were just talking about what might be best for you long term. For me, I repeated. Yes, she said. You shouldn't be alone in a house this large. It's not practical. We were trying to think ahead. Think ahead. Plan. Manage. Relocate. All such gentle words. All meaning the same thing. Remove. I nodded slowly. I see, I said. Ethan looked between us, tension building in his face. Mom, he said, no one is trying to push you out. You already did, I said quietly. That landed. Harder than anything else I'd said. Because it was the truth. And truth doesn't need volume to be powerful. Silence filled the room again. This time, heavier. Vanessa spoke first. If that's how you're choosing to interpret things, she said, her voice cooling slightly, then I think this conversation is becoming unproductive. Unproductive. I almost smiled, because for the first time, I wasn't here to be productive. I was here to be clear. And clarity, I was learning, is not something everyone welcomes. Ethan stood up, not all the way at first, just enough to shift his weight forward, like he was deciding whether to escalate or retreat. This is getting blown out of proportion, he said, running a hand through his hair. No one said anything about forcing you out. We were just talking. Talking. I let the words sit between us. Yes, I said. You were. Vanessa remained seated, but her posture had changed. Let's relax now. More precise. Her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes steady on me. Not soft, not apologetic. Strategic. Margaret, she said carefully, you have to understand something. This isn't personal. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was exactly the problem. Not personal, I repeated. No, she continued. It's about logistics. Long-term planning. You're alone in a large house, and we have growing needs. My mother. There it is, I said quietly. She stopped, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough. Ethan looked confused. What? I turned to him. For the first time, I said, I'm hearing the truth without it being dressed up. Vanessa exhaled, a slight tension finally slipping through her composure. This is exactly what I meant, she said. You're taking things emotionally instead of practically. Emotionally. I stood up slowly, not in anger, not to confront, just to no longer be the one sitting while they explain my life to me. For 40 years, I said, this house was built on emotion, love, sacrifice, commitment. I looked around the room, the walls, the furniture, the quiet weight of memories still lingering in every corner. You call it property, I continued. I call it my life. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Mom, no one is denying that, but things change. People move forward. Move forward. The phrase echoed in my mind. Thomas had been gone less than a month, and already I was something to move past. I'm moving forward, I said. They both looked at me, but not in the way they had before. This time, they were uncertain, because something had changed, not just in what I was saying, but in what I was no longer willing to accept. Vanessa spoke again, more direct now. Then let's be honest, she said. Keeping this house doesn't make sense anymore. Not for you. Not for the family. The family. I held her gaze. For which family? I asked. She didn't answer, because she didn't need to. We all knew. Ethan sighed, frustration breaking through. Mom, why are you making this so difficult, he said. We're trying to figure out what's best for everyone. No, I said calmly. You're trying to figure out what's best for you. That landed. Hard. His expression tightened. That's not fair. I'm not interested in fair anymore. I replied. The room went quiet again, but this silence was different, heavier, final, because for the first time in this entire conversation, I wasn't defending myself. I wasn't explaining. I wasn't negotiating. I was simply refusing. Vanessa stood up then, smoothing her coat slightly. If this is the direction you're choosing, she said coolly, then I think you should be aware of the consequences. I looked at her. Finally. Directly. Go on, I said. Her eyes sharpened. You won't always be able to manage on your own, she said. And when that time comes, decisions will have to be made. It would be better if those decisions were made cooperatively. Cooperatively. Another gentle word. Another quiet threat. I nodded slowly. I agree, I said. That seemed to surprise her. Then I added, that's why I'm making my decisions now. Silence. Real silence this time. Ethan looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't, because the version of me he knew would have given in by now. But that version no longer existed. Vanessa didn't respond. Not immediately. For the first time since she walked into my house, she didn't have a perfectly measured sentence ready. No polished phrasing. No carefully controlled tone. Just silence. Ethan looked between us again, but this time there was something else in his expression. Not just frustration. Unease. Mom, he said, slower now. What exactly are you planning? A fair question. For years, I had made my decisions quietly, adjusting, supporting, accommodating without ever announcing it. They were used to that version of me, the one who acted in the background. But this version? This one didn't hide. I'm planning, I said, to live my life without being managed. Vanessa's lips pressed together slightly. That's a very dramatic way of putting it, she said. No, Irapia. It's an accurate one. Ethan exhaled sharply. No one is managing you. I held his gaze. You discussed where I should live, I said. You discussed when I should leave. You discussed my future without me in the room. Each sentence landed slower than the last. And you think that isn't management? He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Vanessa stepped in again, her voice firmer now. We were trying to prevent a situation where things become difficult later, she said. You may not see it now, but eventually you will need help. I agreed. That seemed to give her a small sense of control again. But, I continued, that help will not come with conditions. Her expression hardened. What does that mean? It means, I said, no one gets to decide my life in exchange for convenience. The room felt smaller somehow. Tighter. Ethan ran a hand over his face. So what? You're just cutting us off? That's it. I considered that. Because this was the moment. The line. And I wanted to be very clear. I'm not cutting you off, I said. You're still my son. He let out a breath, almost relieved, until I finished. But I am ending the version of our relationship where I'm expected to fund your life while being treated like an obstacle. That hit harder than anything before. Vanessa didn't even try to soften her reaction this time. That's unfair, she said flatly. We never treated you like an obstacle. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, you plan my exit. Silence. Total. Because there was no softer version of that truth. Ethan looked at Vanessa again, then back at me. Mom, it wasn't like that. I tilted my head slightly. Then what was it like? I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, and in that small, quiet failure to explain, everything became clear. I nodded once. Not in anger. Not in disappointment. Just acknowledgement. I think we're done here, I said. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. Done. With this conversation, I clarified. And with any assumptions about my life. Ethan stepped forward slightly. You're overreacting. No, I said. I am responding. For the first time, that distinction mattered. More than he realized. I walked toward the door and opened it. A simple gesture, but unmistakable. Vanessa didn't move immediately. She studied me, really studied me now, as if trying to figure out whether this was temporary, emotional, or permanent. And I let her, because for the first time, I wasn't trying to be understood. I was simply being clear. Ethan hesitated the longest. Mom, he said again, softer this time. But I didn't fill the silence for him. I didn't step closer. I didn't make it easier, because that was the old pattern, and the old pattern was over. Finally, he turned. Vanessa followed. They walked out without another word. And when the door closed behind them, the house didn't feel empty. It felt protected. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still resting on the door. Then I locked it, not out of fear, but out of decision. The house was quiet again, but this time, the silence didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. I walked slowly back into the living room, my footsteps softer than usual against the floor. The chair across from mine, where Ethan had been sitting just minutes ago, was empty now. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fill that emptiness. I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't question whether I had been too harsh. I didn't wonder if I should call him back, because deep down, I already knew nothing I had said was wrong. I sat down in Thomas's chair and let out a slow breath. For years, I had believed that maintaining peace was the same as maintaining love. That if I kept things calm, kept things smooth, kept giving, then the relationship would stay intact. But peace without respect isn't peace. It's silence. And I had lived in that silence for far too long. The next morning, the consequences began. At 9:03 a.m., my phone rang. Ethan, I'll let it ring. At 9:07, another call. Then a message. Asterisk, we need to figure this out. Mortgage is due next week. Asterisk. Not how are you? Not can we talk? Just logistics. I stared at the message for a moment. Then I set the phone aside. By noon, another message appeared. This time for Vanessa. I think you're making an emotional decision you'll regret later. I almost smiled. For years, I had been told I was too emotional when I gave. Now I was being told I was emotional when I stopped. Interesting. I didn't reply. Instead, I did something else. I went upstairs. The hallway felt different as I walked through it. Lighter, somehow. Not because anything had physically changed, but because I was no longer carrying the weight of unspoken obligations. I stepped into the small room at the end of the hall. My studio, or at least what used to be. The easel was still there, tucked into the corner. A thin layer of dust covered the surface. Paint brushes sat in a jar by the window, untouched for years. Canvases leaned against the wall, some blank, some half-finished, all abandoned somewhere between responsibility and exhaustion. I hadn't painted since before Ethan got married. There was never time. Or rather, I never allowed myself time. Because there was always something else that felt more important, more necessary, more urgent. I walked over and ran my fingers lightly across one of the brushes. Dust clung to my skin. I didn't wipe it away. I just looked at it. And for a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not grief. Not obligation. Not even relief. Possibility. Downstairs, my phone buzzed again. Another message. Another demand. Another attempt to pull me back into the role I had just stepped out of. But I didn't move. I didn't reach for it. Because for the first time in years, my life was not being interrupted. It was beginning. I picked up a brush. Then another. Set a canvas onto the easel. The room was quiet. Peaceful. Mine. And as I dipped the brush into paint for the first time in years, I realized something simple. Something powerful. They were dealing with consequences. And I was rediscovering myself. The first sign that things were unraveling didn't come from Ethan. It came from silence. No calls that afternoon. No messages demanding explanations. No attempts to fix the situation. Just nothing. And somehow, that told me everything. Because people only go quiet when they realize something is truly out of their control. The next day, however, the storm arrived. At 8:14 a.m., my phone lit up again. Ethan, I let it ring once, twice, then answered. This time, there was no softness in his voice. Mom, we have a serious problem. I leaned back slightly in my chair, the paintbrush still resting between my fingers. What kind of problem? I asked calmly. The bank called, he said. We're behind. Of course they were. For 2 years, my support had been the invisible structure holding their life together. Now that structure was gone, and reality was immediate. I see, I said. That's it, he snapped. That's all you have to say? I didn't respond right away, because there was something important happening here. For the first time, he wasn't speaking to me as a son. He was speaking to me as someone who had lost access to something he depended on. Ethan, I said quietly, this is what responsibility feels like. That's not fair, he shot back. You can't just pull out overnight and expect everything to be fine. I don't expect everything to be fine, I replied. I expect you to handle it. Silence. Sharp this time. You're putting us in a terrible position, he said. No, I said. I'm stepping out of it. That difference mattered. But I could tell. He wasn't ready to understand it yet. What about the house? He pressed. If we lose it. He stopped himself. Too late. The words were already out. I closed my eyes for a brief second. Not from pain. From confirmation. The house had never just been their home. It had been an investment. A plan. A dependency. And I had been part of that plan. Until now. You won't lose it if you manage it, I said. That's not realistic, he said, frustration rising. Vanessa and I have expenses, commitments. And now you have choices, I replied. Another pause. Then, quieter. You're really not going to help? There it was. Not anger. Not control. Something closer to disbelief. Like he still expected me to change my mind if he just asked the right way. And for a moment, I saw him again. Not the man sitting in a house built partly on my sacrifices, but the boy who used to come to me when something broke, trusting that I would fix it, that I always would. My voice softened, but it didn't bend. I have helped you, I said. For years. That's not what I mean, he said quickly. I know, I replied. And that was the problem. He didn't mean appreciation. He meant continuation, dependence, access, and that I was no longer willing to give. On the other end of the line, I heard a faint sound. Vanessa's voice in the background. Sharp. Urgent. What did she say? Ethan didn't answer her right away. Instead, he said quietly, This isn't over, Mom. I looked down at my hands, at the faint traces of paint still clinging to my fingers. No, I said. It's just beginning. I ended the call before he could respond. Then I set the phone aside. For a moment, the room was still again. Peaceful. And in that stillness, I realized something important. Their life was starting to fall apart, and mine was finally coming together. The breaking point came faster than I expected. 3 days later, Ethan showed up alone. No message, no warning, just a hard knock on the door at 7:40 in the evening. I opened it slowly. He looked different, not physically. He was still the same man, same posture, same face, but something underneath had shifted. The confidence he usually carried so easily was gone, replaced by tension, by pressure. Mom, he said, stepping inside before I could respond. We need to talk. I closed the door behind him, but I didn't invite him to sit. He walked into the living room anyway, pacing once, then stopping as if he didn't know what to do with himself. Vanessa and I, he started, then stopped. That alone told me everything. For the first time, he didn't have a clear script. What about you and Vanessa? I asked calmly. He let out a breath, frustrated. We're having some disagreements. Disagreements. Another careful word, but I could hear the strain behind it. About money? I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. It's more than that, he admitted. The house, the payments, everything's piling up. I said nothing, because this was not a problem I needed to solve. This was a reality he needed to face. He ran his hands through his hair again, more agitated now. She thinks you're doing this to punish us, he said. I tilted my head slightly. And what do you think? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me, really looked at me, the way he hadn't in a long time, as if trying to understand who I was now. I think, he said slowly, I think you've changed. I nodded. Yes, I said. I have. Silence settled between us. Not hostile, not tense, just honest. Ethan sat down finally, leaning forward, his voice quieter now. She's talking about selling the house, he said. That landed. Not because I was surprised, but because it confirmed what I already knew. Their foundation had never been stable. It had been supported, artificially, by me. And what do you want? I asked. He looked down at his hands. I don't know, he admitted. That was new. For years, Ethan had always known what he wanted, because the consequences of his choices had never fully belonged to him. Now they did. And uncertainty had finally caught up. She says we need to make practical decisions, he continued. Cut losses. Start over somewhere smaller. Vanessa's voice echoed clearly in his words. Practical. Efficient. Controlled. And you? I asked again. This time he looked up. I don't want to lose everything, he said. I studied him for a moment. Not as a mother trying to protect him, but as a woman observing a man at a crossroads. Then don't, I said. He frowned slightly. It's not that simple. It is, I replied. It's just not easy. That distinction mattered. More than he realized. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. For the first time since he arrived, the urgency in him softened, replaced by something else. Something quieter. Vanessa thinks you'll come around, he said. I didn't respond, because we both knew the answer. She thinks you'll help before things get too bad. Still, I said nothing. And in that silence, he understood, truly understood, because his shoulders dropped slightly, not in relief, in acceptance. You're not going to fix this, he said. No, irreprochable. I'm not. Another pause. Then, almost reluctantly, things are not good between us, he admitted. There it was. Not just financial strain. Cracks. Real ones. Sometimes, I said quietly, when the pressure disappears, so do the illusions. He looked at me. And this time, there was no argument. No defense. Only thought. Because somewhere, deep down, he was starting to see it too. Ethan didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. And for the first time in years, I didn't wait for him. Life moved forward quietly. Mornings became mine again. Coffee by the window, sunlight stretching across the floor, the soft rhythm of a house that no longer felt like it was holding its breath. I painted. At first, just simple things. Light, shadows, the outline of the rose bushes Thomas had planted. Then more. Colors I hadn't touched in years. Emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Not grief. Grief had already taken its space. But something else. Presence. One afternoon, as I was cleaning my brushes, my phone rang. Ethan. I looked at the screen for a moment. Then I answered. Hi, Mom, he said. His voice was different. Quieter. Not tense. Not demanding. Just careful. Hello, Ethan, I replied. There was a pause. I wanted to come by, he said. If that's okay. I considered it. Not out of hesitation, but out of choice. Yes, I said. You can come. He arrived an hour later. Alone. Again. But this time, he didn't walk in. He knocked. I noticed that. Small things matter. When I opened the door, he didn't step forward immediately. He waited. For permission. That mattered too. We sat in the living room, the same space where everything had shifted weeks earlier. But the energy was different now. Softer. Not because the situation had improved, but because something in him had. I've been thinking, he said. I didn't interrupt. I didn't see it before, he continued. How much you were doing. How much we were expecting. There was no defense in his voice. No justification. Just truth. And that alone told me more than any apology could. I should have said something, he added. A long time ago. I nodded slightly. Yes, I said. You should have. He accepted that. Didn't argue. Didn't explain it away. Just accepted it. Vanessa's name didn't come up at first. But eventually, she moved out, he said quietly. I didn't react. Not because I didn't care, but because I understood. Some things don't survive reality. Things got difficult, he admitted. Once the money stopped, everything else came into focus. I looked at him, not with satisfaction, not with judgment, just understanding. Sometimes, I said, we don't see the truth until something we rely on disappears. He nodded. I see that now. Silence settled between us again. But this time, it was peaceful, not empty, not strained, just honest. I'm not asking for help, he said after a moment. That caught my attention, not because of the words, but because of what they meant. I know, I said, and I'm not expecting things to go back to how they were. They won't, I replied gently. He nodded. I figured. Another pause. Then, quieter. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. There it was. Simple. Not dramatic. Not perfect, but real. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. I reached out and rested my hand lightly over his. Not to comfort. Not to fix. Just to acknowledge. I hear you, I said. That was enough. More than enough. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean returning to what was. Sometimes, it means moving forward with clarity. Later, after he left, I walked back into my studio. The late afternoon light filled the room, warm and steady. I picked up a brush, paused for a moment, then smiled, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't living for my role. I wasn't living for expectations. I wasn't living to be needed. I was simply living, on my terms, with my dignity intact. and my peace finally mine.